Welcome back to Thunderstash Gaming. Today we're diving into a lesser known gem in the Castlevania series, Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis. This game took the series in a slightly different direction with a unique style and storyline while still capturing that classic Castlevania magic, but does it still hold up in 2024? Let's whip through time and find out. Castlevania Bloodlines is set in 1917 during World War I, and it introduces a fresh twist to the classic Castlevania formula. Instead of focusing on a member of the Belmont clan, the game follows John Morris, the son of Quincy Morris from Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Eric Lecarde, a skilled lancer. Together they must stop the resurrection of Dracula by his niece, Elizabeth Bartley, who aims to plunge the world into chaos. The game's unique storyline, blending historical events with the dark fantasy of Castlevania, sets it apart from other entries in this series. Talking now about the gameplay, and in Castlevania Bloodlines it stays true to the classic Castlevania formula while introducing some new mechanics. Players can choose, for example, between two characters, each with distinct abilities. John Morris wields the Vampire Killer Whip, while Eric Lecarde uses the Alucard Spear. Whip and Spear can be upgraded up to level 4, turning the Whip into the Undulating Whip and the Spear into the Blazing Spear, both of which allow for mystic attacks. These upgrades add depth to the gameplay, giving players more ways to deal with enemies and navigate levels. When it comes to sub-weapons, the Boomerang is a standout in my opinion. It's overpowered and a fantastic tool to lean on if you're struggling with the game's difficulty. I think it's a lifesaver in tough situations and just adds another layer of strategy to the combat. Visually, Castlevania Bloodlines is a standout title on the Sega Genesis. The game's use of parallax scrolling creates a sense of depth and immersion that was impressive for its time. It's interesting to compare how the Genesis and Super Nintendo both introduced different graphical effects. While Super Castlevania 4 utilized the Mode 7 graphics, Bloodlines leaned into the Genesis's parallax scrolling. Both games brought something graphically unique for their time, and it's actually pretty amazing how well these visuals have held up even today. And I think the game's art style is also top-notch, with detailed backgrounds, eerie environments, and creative enemy designs that capture that dark gothic atmosphere of the series. Jumping in now to the game's soundtrack, and despite the Genesis's reputation for less refined audio compared to the Super Nintendo, Castlevania Bloodlines has a stellar soundtrack, whose composer would later work on Symphony of the Night. The music here is both haunting and memorable. Tracks like Reincarnated Soul and Iron Blue Intention are highlights that still resonate with fans today. The sound effects are also on point, from the crack of the whip to the shrieks of the undead, and as with all classic Castlevania titles, there really isn't a bad song in the mix. Every track feels like it belongs, and they've aged remarkably well. Hearing classic Castlevania tracks like Beginning, Bloody Tears, Vampire Killer, and Simon's Theme on the Sega Genesis hardware is a unique experience. While they don't necessarily sound better than their Super Castlevania 4 counterpart, they sound different in a way that I think is just as good. And I think the Genesis's FM synthesis gives these tracks a distinct flavor that fits perfectly with the game's darker, more intense atmosphere. So who is this game for? I would say Bloodlines is for fans of classic side-scrolling action games, and of course longtime Castlevania aficionados. If you're someone who grew up with the NES or Genesis, this game feels like a trip down memory lane, but it's also accessible for newcomers who appreciate challenging gameplay and the gothic aesthetics. Given its difficulty, it's not for the faint of heart, but for those who relish a good challenge, it's incredibly rewarding, and you can play this on the Castlevania Anniversary Collection on modern consoles, which can often be picked up for as little as $5. Now, when it comes to the game's content, Bloodlines is on par with other linear Castlevania games, from Castlevania 1, 3, and Super Castlevania 4, even Rondo of Blood. It offers a focused experience with a clear beginning and end, relying on the player's skill and perseverance to reach the end credits. Now, when it comes to the game's difficulty, I will say that for reference, most gamers find Castlevania Bloodlines to be brutally difficult. The game doesn't hold your hand. Success in Bloodlines relies heavily on memorizing enemy moves and patterns. And when the game deals you a cheap death, it's on you to learn from it and ensure it doesn't happen again. The difficulty can be very punishing, but it's also what makes finally overcoming those challenges so satisfying in Castlevania Bloodlines. Now, when it comes to the game's emotion and charm, Bloodlines feels like a unique entry in the Castlevania series. With its distinctively darker and more kind of mature atmosphere, I think the game captures a sense of adventure mixed with a dose of gothic horror that's true to the franchise's roots. The music, the visuals, the gameplay all come together to create a memorable experience that sticks with you long after you finish playing the game. And because the game is so hard, it's quite gratifying to finally see the credits roll. I personally hadn't played Bloodlines in years, but I decided to pick it back up and try to beat it for this review. And I'm happy to say that I did finally beat the game. So I was personally able to finally experience that gratification decades after its release. Because I played Castlevania Bloodlines when it first came out. Like, I remember seeing it at Blockbuster. It was like, oh shit, a Castlevania game on Sega. I mean, God, it was probably 30 plus years ago that I played this game. The replay value in Bloodlines comes from its two playable characters and the different paths you can take through the levels. While the game itself isn't long, the multiple routes and character options give it enough depth to warrant multiple playthroughs. It's the kind of game where you'll want to revisit certain levels just to see if you can conquer them faster or more efficiently. So, is the game fun to play? While despite the difficulty, or perhaps because of it, Bloodlines is a blast to play. The controls are tight, the levels are well designed, and the combat is satisfying. It's a game that keeps you on your toes, and every victory feels like a real accomplishment. For fans of this series, or those who love a good challenge, the game is hard to put down. If you're wondering how long it takes to beat the game on average, Bloodlines takes about 2 to 4 hours to beat depending on your skill level. However, mastering it and exploring all the different paths will take longer, especially if you play through with both characters. And again, if it's your first time playing, expect to die a lot. Meaning you could take those 2 to 4 hours and times it probably by 2 or 3. Alright, let's dive in now to the legacy of Bloodlines. And to me, Bloodlines is similar to other Konami titles that only saw one release on Sega, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist, and Contra Hard Corps. I'm glad these games exist, but I can't help but wish we could have gotten some additional sequels. Bloodlines remains a unique entry in the Castlevania series, and one that I think's fondly remembered by fans. I know I personally love the game. Alright guys, now it's time for my final thoughts. Castlevania Bloodlines is a standout title in the series, and I think one of the best games on Sega Genesis. It's got the challenging gameplay, impressive graphics, and a fantastic soundtrack that make it a must-play for Castlevania fans and retro gaming enthusiasts alike. The game is tough, but that's what makes it so rewarding when you finally overcome its challenges. Bloodlines is a hidden gem that deserves more recognition, and it's a great example of what made the Castlevania series so special. Thanks guys for checking out my review of Castlevania Bloodlines. It's a title that doesn't get enough love, but it's one of the best games on the Sega Genesis. If you enjoyed this review, please leave a like, comment your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe to Thunderstash Gaming for more classic gaming content. Stay tuned for more adventures, and remember, the night is dark, but the Belmonts are always there to light the way. As always, thanks for tuning in, guys, and remember, you're never too old to play video games.